Hello, welcome to Legalese. I'm Christopher Lilly, I'm your host. I'm joined today by attorney Maria Santos from Alphen and Santos here in Westford.
Yes.
Maria is kind enough to join us on today's topic, which we are entitling "Changing Immigration." Changing can be an adjective, it can be a verb, but we're looking at the immigration landscape as it currently exists, and right now we're in March 2018.
Yes.
What's going on with immigration right now?
Oh my gosh, Chris, there's so much going on in immigration that it's hard to figure out where to start.
Okay.
But I think if you were going to talk about change and whether it's for the better or the worse, I would say to you that immigration has had a tough situation going, and it's getting tougher in many ways. First, we've got on the illegal or undocumented front, we have absolutely nothing resolved.
Okay.
So because of that, there have been actions by our presidents, first by President Obama, and now actions by President Trump regarding DACA,
This is where the whole controversy of DACA comes in.
Yes,
what does DACA stand for?
Okay, so it's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals.
Okay.
So these are folks who came in who are all under the age of 35, who came in when they were very young with their parents, who basically didn't know themselves that they were doing this, that they were coming without authorization into the United States, or that they overstayed any kind of visa. And when we say they didn't know, it's really truly many of these children did not know.
Right.
They got to a point where they're ending school, they're finishing high school, they want to move on to college. Many of them are very good students, and they just don't have anywhere to go, because if you don't have a legal status, you're not going to be able to get any kind of government assistance, and in some places, you're not going to be admitted into a university for a degree. So what happened is they wanted to know what's going on with me. They go back to their parents, they ask, and in some cases the parents aren't in their lives anymore. And it's caused a lot of really deep resentment even within families.
Okay.
So knowing that this is going on and it impacts over 1 million young people, I think President Obama tried. He didn't get anywhere, so he passed or gave us this policy, DACA, the Deferred Action.
What was the policy in a nutshell?
The policy essentially is that if you entered the United States, you were under, and this, I am so awful at ages, but you're very young. You're under the age of 16. You entered the United States. You're now still under the age of 35. You have a process of applying. So you file a form with the USCIS, and you pay a filing fee, and you document that you've been continuously present in the United States. You give your school records, your hospitalization records, anything that can show this, plus you've attended school. So you either already have a high school diploma or you're working towards a high school diploma. And you might already be in college as well, taking some courses. So you provide all that to our government, and they make a decision whether you can have this entitlement or not.
Okay.
If you get it, you get a work authorization card. What does that get you? That gets you a driver's license.
Okay.
That gets you the ability to be in the United States and do the things we want to do. Drive, go to work, which is extremely important to these young people. And what happened now is that during the Trump administration, he said, well, basically, we're going to end this program.
All right.
So if you've got DACA already, this entitlement, which about 800,000 young people did apply for it.
Having that designation that they're
Have this
entitled
designation,
to that.
yes.
That they have that entitlement.
So he said, we're not going to go beyond this date, which was March. Here, so it's now finished. What happened was that knowing how important it is to the universities, to places of work, several entities filed lawsuits. So we had 2 major lawsuits that resulted in basically orders that allowed these young people to still continue to apply for extensions of this deferred action.
Okay.
So even though Congress didn't do anything about it, they talked a lot, nothing has happened. We do have the ability for young people who already have the entitlement to go ahead and file for extensions.
Now, one of the things that we were talking about earlier was how DACA seems to be kind of a microcosm to the symptoms of what's going on in immigration, and why DACA initially was put in place and then rescinded. What is that saying about what's happening in the immigration fields?
So, Chris, I want to also, if you don't mind, I want to give the website.
Absolutely.
If anybody is out there who is interested in knowing the exact requirements for DACA, just go to uscis.gov and you look under DACA or deferred action for these young arrivals, and you're going to be able to see exactly the requirements. They have a wonderful section, very well done, for DACA recipients or people who want to apply for DACA.
Oh, great.
Okay?
Well,
So if they're
helpful.
interested in that, because I'm not good at remembering, I go to it all the time on dates and times and so on.
Well, as I say at the end of these presentations, also talk to local counsel about what you're dealing with, and that's what they're there for, is to help you.
Yes,
help you
and
through
if
that process.
folks came in to see me and they said, okay, I want to do this, the first thing I do is I go to that rule, we print it out, we look to make sure that, you know, everybody, they can meet these requirements. And many of these young folks have filed on their own. That's how good that section is.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Good.
So your next question is,
we were talking about DACA as an indicator of the
Yes.
bigger picture.
It is an indicator, because what's happened is that Congress has not acted. If you want to change a law, you've got to amend the law. You've got to change it. And many people have talked about comprehensive immigration reform. Well, that's been in the works. I mean, I've been practicing this area of law exclusively since 1996, and we've been talking about it for the last 20 years, and nothing has basically happened in comprehensive immigration reform. What would that do? That would change the law to allow people who came in, overstayed, or came in through the border, and some way to legalize them. Now, people are calling this amnesty. Others would say that they have no right to this because they've broken the law. It's never been enforced. And from my perspective, what I've seen is we've got years of this going on and on without any kind of enforcement action, other than now the administration is pushing more and more for deportations that are not tied just to folks who committed crimes. So without that enforcement, so we've allowed this to go on for so many years with over 11 million people being impacted. So deferred action is just a subset of these individuals. Okay, now brings in another thing that's big in the news lately, and that is chain migration.
Right. And how that impacts on family.
Yes, and so what happens in immigration is that you've got family-based immigration, and you've got employment-based immigration, you have refugees, and then you have these folks who, like the DACA recipients, who are benefiting from humanitarian type of benefit, okay? When you look at the whole thing, a little bit over 648,000 people do immigrate to the United States every year. 66% come under the family-based immigration.
Okay.
Under 20% come under the employment-based immigration.
Okay.
So what happens? What's chain migration? Chain migration is something that happened even with my family. So I'll give you an example. I came to the United States with my parents. I was 9 years old. I'm a derivative of my father's petition. Okay. So my father came to the United States under employment-based immigration, but my aunt, his sister, brought in his two other siblings. She came to the United States she was able to be here, to be legal in the whole thing. And then she petitioned for her other two brothers. But my father didn't want to wait in line, so he got a job offer in the United States and came in through employment-based. So
Okay.
my sister, his sister, was able to bring in these folks. They call this chain migration.
Well, that's a newer term nowadays, right?
Right.
That's
Family unity is
we
what
go.
we used to call it, and we still call it.
much nicer.
It is nicer. But even another good example that's been in the news lately too is Mrs. Trump. She legalized in the United States through employment-based immigration. She was a well-known model.
Okay.
And so she's an O1. She was in that field. So O1 is a temporary worker.
Okay.
They come to work temporarily as outstanding in their field.
Okay.
And then she was able to apply for a green card. And once she had her green card, she waited over 5 years, naturalized, became an American citizen. And American citizens have the right to petition. And they can petition for their parents. And their parents are immediate relatives. So they don't have to wait in line for a visa number.
Oh, okay.
So her parents are now in the United States as green card holders. And I heard recently in a news article that they're going to apply for naturalization very soon.
As chain
That's chain migration.
Interesting.
Or family unity.
So I think we've talked about two very different approaches to the immigration question, and that is people who have come in illegally, and that's
Right.
perhaps the DACA situation in many cases in any event.
Right.
And we're talking about people who come in legally through employment, family-based. Let's talk about some of that
Okay.
now, as far as what's
Sure. So there's so much in immigration that you really kind of have to focus. So the majority of what I do, my focus is employment-based immigration. Because that's what's available out there to bring in somebody legally. And I'm an attorney and I'm following the law, right?
Right.
So I might have a client who's a company in the United States, and that company brings in temporary workers to fill positions that they can't fill in the United States. And there are some people who always ask me, are you sure they really need to find those workers? Well, you need to think about it
Are
because
you sure if they really need to find the workers?
yes,
Okay.
because we have lots of people here who want this employment. Well, in Massachusetts right now, the unemployment rate is below the national average. We're at 3.5%, I think. In the tech field, many of my clients are tech companies. They have negative unemployment rate. So many of their positions go unfilled, or they start subsidiaries overseas to fill those positions in other countries, and then interact, exchange personnel back and forth so that they can fill positions here when they need it.
And
with
those
folks from
employers
other
are coming
countries.
to you to assist in making that happen.
Making that happen, that's
and,
right.
And what has to happen to make that happen?
So a couple of very popular or well-known temporary visas for work would be the H-1 and the L-1. The H-1 is a temporary visa that allows somebody to be in the United States 6 years, and if they were in a green card path, more than 6 years. And during that time, they have to have a particular employer sponsor. So let's say Microsoft wanted to bring in Mr. A to fill in a position as a software developer, and that gentleman is from India. And he has a bachelor's degree, and let's say that he has 5 years of experience, So they bring him in, and he fills that position, and 3 years into it, he says, Microsoft, can you sponsor me for a green card? Because now I've got kids in the school system, I've bought a very nice house in a beautiful suburb of Seattle, and I really want to stay here, and my kids don't want to go back. Teenagers never want to go back.
Sure.
So Microsoft says, sure. And Microsoft has an in-house, huge immigration area. And so they start sponsoring him for a green card. It's easier said than done. A person, it's going to take a couple of years before that individual even has the right to get into the last step of this green card. It's a 3-step process when it's based on a labor certification. So you have to test the market to see if there are American workers who want to fill this position.
Oh, boy.
If there are none, you go to the next step where you apply for the visa through immigration, through USCIS, and then a visa number has to be available. And therein lies the real crux of the matter. If you're from India, and let's say you applied with the equivalent of a master's, which is a bachelor's plus 5 years of experience, you are going to wait almost over 10 years right now in order to get that visa number to be available.
So there are a limited number of numbers available for people
Each
to
year.
take.
I have some folks who have been with our office now well over 13 years because they have bachelor's degrees. And so their priority date has never become current, and they don't have a visa number available yet to get that green card. Now, another thing that changed in this whole process during the current administration is that before, interviews were always waived for just about all interviews were waived for employment-based immigrants.
Interviews of what nature?
So the last stage, you're going to get your green card, your visa number's available, and they would just send out a question asking for more updated information and then issue the green cards when the visa became available.
Okay.
Now, they want the information, but they also set up this person, plus very likely his family, who are his derivatives, for an interview. And they have to go in front of an officer at USCIS, which I can understand because fraud could be an issue, many things that you can ask individuals about. However, this person has been employed for many years by an employer who's kept him on, and so that kind of issue has been tested already for this individual, which I think is very different from somebody who comes in maybe as a family-based individual. They should go to an interview in front of an officer because nobody's tested him on whether or not he should be here in the United States or not for any reason.
Sure.
So it's become harder.
In the scenario you're talking about where you've already got the employment history there, it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't, and it's tying things up tremendously.
Is it?
It delays it by more months again, and the visa could become unavailable again. So, tough.
How does that happen? If I've got my eyes on a number and I just have to go through the interview process, how do I lose that number?
So let's say that you're going to have to wait 8 months for the interview, or even 6 months. Each fiscal year, there's an allotment. So, and it doesn't go beyond those numbers. So when you look at those priority dates on the visa bulletin that's issued every single month by the Department of State, these are the numbers available in this category for this country. The following fiscal year, or even the following month within a fiscal year, you could have had a retrogression, or you could have had the numbers speed up. It depends on how many are being asked for in that particular category. So it's complex.
Sure.
And it's very time delayed for these individuals.
So that's a lot of the backlogs that we see
Those
in
are
the
huge backlogs. Now in family-based, that happens too.
Okay.
Now here's why. All right, so I just met with a family this past week from the Philippines. And about 14 years ago, a sister applied for another sister to come into the United States. And at that time, the sister's children were, 15 and 17 years old. Well, so much time has passed in between. These young kids are now over 21 years of age. Right, so they're now in a different classification. So let me go back a minute.
Sure.
So this lady has now waited all of these years for her visa number to become available so that she could go to the consulate, U.S. consulate in the Philippines, apply for her immigrant visa, which is the green card, to come into the United States. But she wanted to bring her sons with her. Now they're in their later 20s and early 30s, and they no longer qualify because they're over 21.
No.
They're no longer her immediate derivatives, so they
Okay.
can't. So now they're in a different classification. This is again part of that
Sure.
family unity, chain migration type of thing. And so she's been waiting in line. There are millions of people waiting in line for those visas in the family-based immigration. So families are still coming in, but they're coming in because they're waiting in line to come in legally. And that's why many people get upset that we've got these 11 million in the United States who jumped the gun, are here in the United States, and why should they get a green card
The
when
ones
all
that
those
jump the
people are
guns
waiting
who are
in
here
line?
illegally
Yes,
are, I understand that.
are waiting in line,
Yeah.
right? So that's the whole controversy about this,
Okay.
all right?
Okay.
So, what are we going to do about it?
What are we going to do about it? First of all, how do we deal with the backlog?
Right. So one of the things that the president has been talking about, and he gave his parameters for which we would have a DACA relief and so on, is let's talk about a merit-based immigration system.
Okay.
So when you look at the rest of the world, there are some countries that have already gone to move to this merit-based immigration system. What you look at is, does the individual have a degree, education? Does the individual speak English? Does the individual have a history of employment? So you give points to different type of things in the personal life. And I was thinking about this. What if you had a Nobel Peace Prize winner who didn't speak English? They actually lose points. But do you want them in the United States? So those are the kinds of questions that you have to ask about that merit-based system. But Canada's gone to one. Australia, the English system, the UK. So you have to really think about whether maybe in the United States what we want and what we need is less of the family-based chain, family unity type of migration, and maybe we need to focus more on what the economy needs.
Okay.
Because
And that's where the merit base comes
that's what they're talking about. And is it possible that if we have that kind of system, then maybe people won't run in over the border? Because when the economy really needs these folks, the economy will allow them in.
Okay.
And when we don't need them, then we put a stop to it. So does that mean that also we need these border fences and we need border protection and we need employers to be verifying through a federal system that the individual has work authorization, which is called E-Verify?
Okay.
Okay. Do we need to make that mandatory, which right now it isn't mandatory?
Now, employers, as I recall, can be on the hook for certain misrepresentations of Social Security numbers and that sort of thing. That is in place.
So right now, if the only way usually to get employers and whether they violated something, it would very likely be the I-9 verification system.
Okay.
Because that is mandatory.
Right.
If you hire somebody as an employer, you've got to have them complete an I-9.
Okay.
What happens in some instances, and there are plenty of penalties out there, and some managers have actually served time, is that they've created schemes within companies where the managers knew or know that in their community there are plenty of folks who will fill the positions but don't have work authorization, and they'll accept false documents and so on without looking beyond
Turning a blind eye.
questioning it. Now, it's really a fine line for employers, though, because you also have discrimination laws that you must adhere to. So if you see a person in front of you who might look Latino in your community and comes to apply to you for work, and you say, are you going to say, just because you look like that, I'm going to question whether this is really a real green card or whether there isn't a real green card? No, unless you've got some kind of scheme going on that everybody should know, really knows what's going on. So right now, the way to enforce that is very difficult because it has to be through an I-9 type of system and a verification. But E-Verify is an online system. The employer essentially enters into a contract with the government and signs a contract with the government saying, every time I hire someone, I'm going to enter their information into your system, and you're going to let me know whether this individual has work authorization.
Okay. So do those two systems interact with one another?
So where E-Verify gets its information from is the immigration database.
Okay.
And also what every state wants to get, which is these new licensing requirements, the actual identification systems that the federal government wants you to have in place, right? So Massachusetts is going to come online, is it March 16th, I think?
Okay.
Where Real ID
All right.
is the name of it. And, you know, they want states to have Real ID because then you've verified that the individual is either an American citizen or authorized to work and now has a driver's license or an ID from your state.
Okay.
That information will enter the E-Verify database, and so more ability to verify whether the individuals can or cannot work.
Okay.
Right now, E-Verify doesn't have all that information. So sometimes there are great errors in it, and it causes employers problems.
But we anticipate those problems will, in the
Could
case
get
of
resolved.
Massachusetts, when they come online, that it may get resolved at that point.
It might get it better.
Okay.
And E-Verify was a thought a long time ago. When, you know, during the Reagan administration, there was an immigration law change.
Yeah.
But there was never funding for these type of border fences or E-Verify systems or even I-94. When a person enters the United States, they get a little arrival departure record, which now actually is done digitally. And that tells us how long they can stay in the United States if it's a temporary entry. But nobody ever follows up on that. Until pretty recently, we didn't even know if the government still had that record. So now they're putting some systems into place, but everything costs money and there's no funding available. So not good.
So Congress has quite a bit ahead of it to
It has
try to
quite a bit ahead of it.
iron some things out.
You're right, Chris.
Well, that I think brings us to the end of this
There's no
very
way.
short time
Half an
period to
hour
be
has
able to talk
passed.
about these important issues
They are
in
important.
the immigration front. So perhaps I could have you come back on another day and we can see where things are going. And
Yes, or focus on something else that you might be interested in. Sure.
But I thank you very much for
It was a pleasure.
for coming in and speaking to us about immigration and some of the changes that need to be made and some of the changes that are attempting to be made at this point.
I'm always hopeful.
Thank you. As I said, please talk to local counsel. That's where you should be receiving your advice from. On behalf of Maria Santos, I'm
you.
Christopher Lilly. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.